All right, the attendance is running. Please sign in. All right, another minute. Everyone please sign in. And last name, comma, first, please. Okay, we're get started. Before we start today, I'd like to introduce, is he here? Here, Tyler? Okay, he's not here. Your first Langdell's coming up, and your Langdell will be Tyler, who was one of my top students last year. I thought he was here. Maybe he's coming later the next class. I can't recall. But he'll be emailing you soon about your first session. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Any questions from last class before we get started? Okay. Let's try some questions to see how well you understand Lopez and Morrison. Okay, so I'm going to start the clicker. Every time I start a new class, it signs me out. So I apologize. There's always a delay whenever I have to start this thing anew. All right, so here's the link to the class chat, to the class notes. Okay. And we're going to do question number 1. So question number 1, it's a true-false. The possession of a gun in a school zone is interstate commerce. True or false? Okay, true or false? All right. Very good. 90% of you put B. That's the correct answer. The sale of a gun may involve interstate commerce. The possession of a gun may affect interstate commerce, but the mere possession of itself is not interstate commerce. Okay? Question number 2. This is again true-false question. Possession of a gun in a school zone is intrastate economic activity. The possession of a gun in a school zone is intrastate economic activity. Another 10 seconds. Okay, perfect. Very good. A little bit closer. This was 75-25, but the answer here again is B, false. The possession of a gun is interstate activity. Intrastate meaning within one state. But the court says merely possessing a gun is not economic activity. It's activity, it's intrastate, but it's not interstate economic activity. So there are 3 things in that phrase you have to keep in mind are separate, right? There's activity, intrastate activity, and intrastate activity that's economic, right? And as we get to the Obamacare case today, I think you have to keep those 3 things in mind. The court's precedents didn't just look at one, it's whether it's activity, that's intrastate, and that's economic, right? There are these three elements you have to keep in your minds. Okay? All right. Another question, this one's short answer. Question number 3 on Lopez. And by the way, this is all Lopez. We haven't even touched rates yet. These are all questions from Lopez. Congress could only regulate intrastate activity that substantially affects interstate commerce if the intrastate activity is blank in nature. I want you to fill in the blank. Congress could only regulate intrastate activity that substantially affects interstate commerce if the intrastate activity is blank in nature. 5 more seconds. Perfect. You all got this one right. Very good. The answer is economic. You see what I did here with these 3 questions, right? I'm trying to get you to understand the precise contours of the court's approach. People simply assume that everything's interstate commerce. It's not. Lopez established that there's some activity that's intrastate. There's intrastate activity, and that intrastate activity can be economic or non-economic. Why does a distinction matter between economic and non-economic? The distinction matters between economic and non-economic because of question 3, the substantial effects test. Okay? The substantial effects test from Darby and Wickard is what lets Congress regulate local activity. Again, the distinction between economic and non-economic activity is what gets you to the substantial effects test. The growing of wheat on Roscoe Filburn's farm was economic activity. Therefore, you could aggregate all of that local activity. Okay? The possession of a gun, however, was non-economic activity. Therefore, you cannot put gun possession into the substantial effects test. It doesn't matter that if lots of people have guns locally, it may affect commerce in other states. That's irrelevant. Domestic violence was not considered economic activity. Therefore, you cannot insert domestic violence into the substantial effects test to get aggregate effects in commerce. Okay? But then we get to Raich, Gonzalez v. Raich. Right? Let's do question number 4. The federal prohibition of growing marijuana is an essential part of a large regulation of blank, in which the regulatory scheme could be undercut unless the interstate activity were regulated. Okay. Give me another 30 seconds. Another 15 seconds. This one's a little bit closer. This is, by the way, a verbatim quote from Raich. I'm not making this up. Another 5 seconds. Okay, I'll stop it here. The answer here, which about 40% of you got right, is economic activity. Right? Question 3 and 4 are basically asking the same thing. Right? Congress can establish these elaborate schemes to regulate local economic activity. Right? They don't need to jump through any hoops to regulate interstate commerce. A lot of people put commerce here, and that's wrong. That's wrong. Congress doesn't need to jump through hoops to regulate interstate commerce. They do need to jump through hoops to regulate local economic activity. Again, let me make this point very clear. If we're dealing with interstate commerce, Congress can rely on their Commerce Clause powers and they're fine. But Congress here wants to regulate local conduct, and the Commerce Clause is not enough. So they have to turn to which provision? The Necessary and Proper Clause. And the Necessary and Proper Clause lets you regulate local economic activity if those local economic activities have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. But Rach put a different spin on it. If Congress has a broad regulatory scheme, a national scheme to prohibit controlled substances, they can then prohibit local economic activity. Right? They can prohibit the cultivation of marijuana, which might undermine that national scheme. So everyone see that progression. Go through questions 1 through 4, right? Is possessing a gun interstate commerce? No, it is not. Is possessing a gun interstate economic activity? No, it is not. But Congress can regulate local activity that's economic. That's question 3. And Congress can regulate local cultivation of marijuana if it's part of a larger regulatory scheme of economic activity. Right? You see these pieces built together. You have activity that's interstate and economic in nature. If it's not economic in nature, you do not get to the Necessary and Proper Clause. Right? You do not get to the substantial effects test. This was the O'Connor and the Thomas dissent in Rach. These are very intricate concepts, and that I encourage you after class to go through questions 1 through 4. Revisit these. Because most people don't understand the nuances. They think, oh yeah, everything's interstate commerce, whatever, it's all interstate. It's not. You have to look at intrastate economic activity. Intrastate economic activity. If you're writing on your exam about intrastate commerce, you're probably wrong, right? We don't talk about intrastate commerce. We talk about intrastate economic activity. You can have interstate commerce, but you don't have intrastate commerce. That's not really a thing, right? That's not a phrase that has any significance. All right, Lainey, yes, go ahead.
May we use local economic activity and whatever you just said, intrastate economic activity interchangeably?
You can. I may do so from time to time. I prefer intrastate because it's making it more clear, but intrastate and local are basically synonyms. That's fine.
Thank you.
Does that point make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lainey. Okay, good. Questions so far? Okay. The line of cases from Darby to Wickard, and then Lopez, Morrison, and Rach, right? You have to place those cases in context. Darby and Wickard established the substantial effects test. The substantial effects test is premised on the Necessary and Proper Clause. The substantial effects test says you can aggregate local economic activity or local intrastate economic activity. You can add those activities together to determine if they have a substantial effect on interstate commerce. Right? Lopez, Morrison, and Raich reaffirm those principles, maybe even narrow them, but they're all connected. And the thread, according to Lopez, the thread that connects all 5 of those cases is whether an activity is economic in nature. Right? That's the common thread between Darby, Wickard, Lopez, Morrison, and Raich. Right? Is the regulation of economic activity. And if there is a regulation of economic activity, then Congress is good. Why were Lopez and Morrison's different? Lopez and Morrison were different because the court found the activity was not economic in nature. Possessing a gun was not economic in nature. Domestic violence was not economic in nature. Okay. There was a question in the chat about question 4 from Scalia's concurrence. Question 4 is actually based on Lopez, right? Justice Stevens quoted Lopez favorably in Raich. And this discussion of the broader regulatory scheme actually comes from Lopez. But the key move that Stevens made was by defining cultivation of marijuana as economic activity. Forget you're not selling it, just the mere growing of it. And if the cultivation, the growing of marijuana is economic activity, then under Lopez, the Controlled Substances Act is fine. Right? That's the most important move. Is it economic activity? Is it economic in nature? Right? Once Chief Justice Rehnquist made that the test, he was going to lose. Because you get a bigger dictionary to get a definition of what economic is, and everything is economic. Right? The same way that you can use a dictionary to define any way you want, you use Webster's dictionary to get a big definition of of economic, and that was the end of the game. So, Rehnquist had maybe a 7-year run on economic being a limiting principle. The run didn't last very long. Thank you for the question, number 4. Anything else before we go to question 5? Okay, let's do question number 5, and let me give you a preview of it first. So far, we've been talking about whether an activity is intrastate or interstate. And we've been talking about whether an activity is economic or non-economic. But there's a threshold question that I sort of just skipped over. What is an activity? What is an activity? Can something be the opposite of activity? Inactivity? Why would Congress ever regulate inactivity? So the question here for you, and I'm going to ask a follow-up. I'm going to put a question 6 here I just thought of, which is pretty good. I'll ask that in a second. But I'll answer question 5 first. I just called an audible. Let's do that. 5 more seconds. Okay. Is the decision to not purchase health insurance intrastate economic activity? Okay. I'll come back to the results in a minute. Try what I've called question number 6. I just made this up 2 seconds ago, so we'll see. Let's see how the results are here between question 5 and question 6. Could Congress require people to wear face masks to prevent the spread of COVID-19? I always think these questions are hypothetical, and then here the world we're living in. That's the world we're in. Now the results for 5 and 6 should be the same. Maybe not. I don't know. Let's see how the class breaks down. All right. Who's next? If you can just raise your hand, please. Someone's got to be next.
Next. James Taylor.
Oh, James. There you go. Okay. All right, James. So let's walk through your answer for the questions 5 and question 6. Okay. What did you put for question 5?
No.
So you said the decision to purchase health insurance is not.
The decision not to purchase it
Is
not.
Yeah, there's double negatives. So let's say without not. So you answered no to the first one, right? Question 5.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this not interstate economic activity? Why is this decision not?
I don't think not purchasing something is activity.
Okay. Why not?
I was basically just thinking about the case that we read, them talking about how making that we couldn't regulate a non-activity.
But is not buying insurance, let's just say make it easier, going uninsured, right? Without the negative, right? Is going uninsured inactivity?
Is it inactivity?
Yeah.
Or an activity?
I said inactivity. It's hard without the negatives. It happens every year. But is going uninsured not an activity?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
I think that not doing something is not an
So you're just sitting at home, sitting on your couch, watching Zoom all day. You're not engaged in activity.
For sure you are. You're on Zoom all day.
What if you wake up in the morning and you do nothing?
It's a choice. Waking up is an activity, I guess.
Yeah, if you don't wake up, that's not good. James, so now try number 6. The question about the face masks. Could Congress require people to wear face masks in public to prevent the spread of COVID?
I think yes. So my answers on 5 and 6 are not the same.
Okay, so what power would give Congress the ability to impose a face mask mandate? You have to walk through it step by step.
Well, I think initially we look at the Commerce Clause.
Okay.
Does wearing a face mask affect interstate
Wrong.
commerce?
Wrong. You're doing the exact thing.
Hold on.
Okay.
So we have the Commerce Clause, and so then we look at.
Well, no. So is a single person wearing face mask commerce among the several states?
No, but purely local activity that in the aggregate is.
Okay, one clause at a time. Okay, so I'll do what you said. You start with the Commerce Clause, and we ask, is the wearing of a face mask, or actually more precisely, the decision not to wear a face mask, commerce among the several states?
No, sir.
Okay, what's our next question then, James?
No. I have a list. Somehow I want to get to necessary and proper.
I know you do. Well, what case do you need to get to necessary and proper?
Every single one we read this semester.
Wise guy. Okay, go give me one to start with.
Well, it's not Ogden. So, I don't know, McCullough? The means end?
Yeah, it's not working. Who's next? Bianca, you here? You're not in here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Let's look at question number 6.
Okay.
What would give Congress the power to require people to wear face masks?
Okay, so I
thought about in this NFIB case about how Chief Justice Roberts looked at, he broke apart necessary and proper instead of looking at it as one.
You're giving me all good stuff, but I'm asking for a case, right? If, Congress imposes a mask mandate and you're a law clerk in the Supreme Court, what case do you start with? I'm being very tough on James and Bianca quite deliberately, but this I have to start thinking, right? What case or cases do you need to rely on to consider this issue about a mask mandate?
Okay, yeah, I kind of agree with James. Maybe McCulloch, where it says where Hamilton uses needful, requisite.
Try a more recent case.
I'm sorry?
Try a more recent case.
More recent? Okay, let's see.
Yeah, Marshall's good, but there's stuff has happened in the last 200 years. James, you want to take a stab?
Oh, wait, okay, hold on, I have an idea.
Okay, well, I'll get to James 1 second. Let's see if Bianca has it.
Would it be the aggregation doctrine? Because if you combine everyone wearing a mask...
Well, okay. So aggregation doctrine, what case are we talking about here?
Okay, we're talking about Wickard.
Okay, Wickard. Okay. Now, let's be precise, Bianca. What lets you get to the aggregation principle? What do you have to have? What were the first 4 questions I asked today getting at? What lets you go to the aggregation principle?
Intrastate economic activity.
There it is. You need intrastate economic activity. Okay? I think James James, is that what you're going to say? Yeah, okay, perfect. But you both got it at the same time. Good. All right, Bianca, you need intrastate economic activity. In this question 6 with the mask mandate, what is the intrastate economic activity? Congress has to regulate some intrastate economic. What is an intrastate economic activity?
What is the intrastate economic activity in wearing a mask and requiring people to wear a mask?
Well, no. That wasn't my question. What is the intrastate economic activity that's being aggregated? What is Congress regulating?
We're regulating public health.
I'll be a little more precise. What is the activity they're regulating? Is it possessing a gun? Is it domestic violence? Is it cultivating marijuana? What is the activity they're regulating? Was it?
It's requiring people to...
Well, if people are already wearing... let's say you're a good citizen, you're wearing a mask. Is Congress worried about you if you're already wearing a mask being a good citizen?
No.
Who are they worried about?
The people who are refusing to wear the mask, or if they're immunocompromised.
That's it. Okay, very good, Bianca. Thank you. All right, now I'll call on Seth in a second. But let's just be very clear here, right? There are steps you have to jump through to make constitutional law work. Right? You can't just say, oh yeah, economic aggregation, whatever. No, that's not going to work in my class. Other classes it might work, not here. You first ask yourselves, what is the activity? Okay, people are not wearing masks, right? That's the problem. People not wearing masks, it's a problem because they're spreading COVID and all this other stuff, right? People are not wearing masks. Is a person not wearing a mask commerce among the several states? No. There's no intercourse, there's no change, there's no exchange, there's no trade. So the Commerce Clause is out. So then we think of the Necessary and Proper Clause. Right? What cases we think about? Of course, McCulloch, right? That's just like your default answer. When in doubt, say McCulloch. You're probably right. But that's not the case I'm looking for. Right? You're thinking of the aggregation doctrine from the substantial effects test, which is from Wickard, which I think Bianca and probably James had a minute ago. Okay? And under the aggregation doctrine and the substantial effects test, we ask, what is the local intrastate activity? right? What is the local intrastate activity? Is it economic in nature? Growing wheat? Yes. Possessing a gun? No. Domestic violence? No. Raising marijuana? Yes. Right? What is the economic activity? But then there's the other question. It's not just whether it's intrastate and economic. There's that third word. There's activity. And this is a subject of the NFIB case. It's not enough to say that there's something that's economic and there's something that's intrastate. You have to ask yourself, is it activity? And that's where I was trying to push you. And I think between Bianca and James, they both got to that point. Right? Is a decision not to do something? Right? Is a decision to not do something an activity? For example, I don't want to buy insurance. I don't want to buy insurance. Don't want to do it. Or I don't want to wear a mask. I don't like masks. They can't breathe well. They look ugly. I don't want to wear a mask. And I bet there's a huge overlap between people who don't wear masks and don't want to buy insurance. I think it's probably, there's a Venn diagram. It's probably like, the same circle, right? Which is, I think, completely, for reasons I can explain later, understandable. Is a libertarian instinct that you don't want the government telling you what to do. And I think the Obamacare case reflects some of the bigger issues going on in our society. But again, is the decision to not buy insurance activity? Or is the decision to not buy or not wear a face mask activity? Well, let's flip it around. Seth, you here?
Yes.
So, Seth, let me ask you a question. What happens if a person doesn't purchase health insurance and then they get sick and go to the ER?
They get treated.
Okay, they'll get treated, and then what happens when the bill shows up?
They can't pay it.
Or maybe they can. You don't know that. Maybe they have cash and they want to.
Oh.
I mean, you're presuming, but you're probably right. They maybe don't pay their bill. Is the decision to forego health insurance doing nothing?
No.
How might you characterize the decision to forego health insurance? Maybe you can characterize it differently. Are you doing nothing or are you doing something?
I think you're doing something. It's a choice.
It's a choice to do what?
To forego an option to be insured.
And so then when are you going to have to pay for your medical treatment?
After you receive
That's it. Right. You may have heard the concept of self-insurance, which basically means you pay your own bills, right? During the Obamacare litigation, one of the arguments was that the decision not to buy health insurance was not nothing. It was not inactivity. It was a choice. You were choosing to postpone the payment of your health insurance. Instead of buying it beforehand, the argument went, you would simply roll the dice, and if you got a bill in the mail, you'd pay it later, or go to collections, whatever, right? But you're simply postponing the payment of your insurance. So was the decision to not buy insurance actually inactivity, right? Was the decision to go uninsured intrastate economic activity or not? Now, Smiha, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Now, let's try this with the mask mandate. This is a new argument. This is just, like only a couple months old. There's no such law, by the way, thankfully. I think such a law would be probably unconstitutional, but is not wearing a mask economic activity? Is not wearing a mask economic activity?
Can you consider that places that do mandate masks you can't enter? So like,
Oh, you're asking such a good question. I'm just saying walking around in public or even in your own home. Walking on the sidewalk.
no.
What if all the people, in Texas don't wear masks, and that creates a super spreader event, and it causes massive fatalities, and it depletes PPE reserves. Can't one idiot not wearing a mask screw up the entire country?
Yes. I guess you could say it's economic in nature because if they don't wear the mask and they do get sick, then they're going to have to go to the hospital to get insurance. Healthcare.
How did Rach define economic? You can check your notes. That's fine if you want to look up your notes from last week. How did Rach define economic?
Production, distribution, and consumption of commodities.
Is the decision not to wear a mask the production, consumption, distribution of a commodity?
Yeah, and this feels like a trick question.
It's not. I'm asking. This is a brand new thing. I didn't. Last semester I didn't think to ask about a mask mandate, but here we are.
I mean, yes, because you're not consuming the commodity of a mask, so you're not going to buy a mask.
It's smart. Good argument. Good right. But I see you're struggling with it. I can see you're struggling. I think the answer is it's not economic activity. As broadly as Justice Stevens defined economic activity in Rach, I don't think it encompasses the decision to wear a mask. So I think a federal mask law would be unconstitutional. I've written this in a couple places. But Smiha made a very smart point. She says, well, couldn't Congress regulate the places where you go? Any business that does affect interstate commerce must require its customers to wear masks. I think that's what you were getting at, Smiha?
Yeah.
That's harder for a different reason I don't want to go into now. But that's a better example. But if this was a straight up mandate that you have to wear a mask everywhere, I don't think Congress could do it. States can. They have that police power, but I don't think Congress can.
Where does the argument of general welfare come in when you have necessary and proper? Because,
where do you get this general welfare? Where's this come from, general welfare? What are you talking about?
like,
where's that phrase appear in the Constitution?
I know it doesn't appear in the Constitution.
Oh, it does. It does.
Oh, it does. Because it's a public health crisis, so can't they use that?
Do whatever they need to?
I'm sorry?
Use the public health crisis to do whatever they need to?
Yes. Because it's necessary and proper for them to ask people to wear masks.
Necessary and proper for what, though?
For protecting people?
Is that what the clause says?
No.
I see you're struggling with this because you don't want you want the answer to be yes. There's nothing wrong with that. I get it, and I think there's a completely rational side of this debate. How can it be that a federal government, a national government, lacks the power to do something so basic that every country in the world is able to do, which is require people to wear masks? Ours doesn't have that sort of general power. The states have the police power, not the federal government. And that's why I think you've seen in the last 5 or 6 months such a wide range of responses from state to state. The federal government doesn't have the power to impose a mandate on wearing masks. The feds cannot shut down private businesses. They probably could, but they would have to pay for it, right? The federal government cannot order people to quarantine unless they're traveling. There's some examples with traveling that might be different, but most quarantine statutes are by the states. Very often, the limits on federal power prevent the government from doing things you might think are good and positive.
But can't you compare this to like wearing a seatbelt?
Well, those are state laws. State laws require to wear seatbelts, not federal laws.
Oh, okay.
See, usually someone asks us, well, if they can make you wear a seatbelt, why can't they make you buy insurance? Those are state laws. Perversely, or somewhat paradoxically, federal law requires cars to include seatbelts. Right? A car manufacturer must put a seatbelt in the car. but it's a state that requires you to wear it. She doesn't like this answer. Lane, is that Gavin?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Ask, what about like through taxing power?
Oh, yeah, and someone just put that in the chat. Could Congress impose a tax on not wearing a mask? God bless you, John Roberts.
And then give the states the option whether they want to impose like a law themselves.
Oh, now you're thinking like a constitutional lawyer. Very good. And Catherine at the same point in the chat. Very good. Exactly right. Congress could achieve this goal indirectly. They could simply tax people for not wearing a mask. So let's just say every day you're not wearing a mask, you just pay $1,000 tax. I think they can do that. They can't penalize you for not wearing a mask, but they can tax you. How can that make sense? People, I see you guys rolling your eyes. Like, how's that even possible? Why is it so stupid, right? Yeah, I can see you. I'm sorry, you're on camera. It's okay. It actually works well. It's a strange aspect of our Constitution that you can do things one way, not the other. Someone mentioned, well, why can't Congress offer the states money in exchange for imposing a mask mandate? They could. Think of South Dakota v. Dole. Right? Congress couldn't raise the drinking age in South Dakota, but they could give the state money to impose the drinking age requirement. So if Congress says, hey, Texas, you like that money, you better impose a mask mandate. And Lainey mentioned the Medicaid funding is a very good segue to our case today. Any other questions on the mask question? I've never asked before because it never seemed, like even relevant. But it's amazing how, I'll get to you a second, Lainey. It's amazing how, you have these decisions that are written at one point in time, and then you try and apply them to completely different scenarios that were not anticipated by Justice Stevens. He actually passed away about a year ago. But you have these cases, you have these tests that are applied to these novel circumstances. And constitutional lawyers are scrambling to figure out, well, if you can't do it this way, you have to do it another way. I am less concerned if you get the ultimate answer correct. And I'll get to the 5 and 6 in a bit. I'm more concerned with the framework. You say, okay, what case we start with? Okay, we start with Wickard. Okay, what about Lopez? Okay, what about Morrison? Okay, what about Raich? Is it economic? Okay, is it intrastate? Okay, is it activity? You need to jump through those hoops, and that's what makes, in my mind, a winning constitutional argument. I don't care what your end game is. Your policy preferences matter nothing to me. It's not important to me. But you have to make your arguments within the confines of the Supreme Court's doctrine. You can say these cases are wrong. Hell, I say it all the time. These cases are often wrong. But this case, I still think is wrong, even a decade later. But you have to be able to make arguments using the law and the language of constitutional law. And that's where I think you're starting to get at. Okay, Lainey, I know your hand was up a minute ago.
So for this hypo you've been doing, I would just go to Lopez and say not wearing a mask is like possessing a gun.
Very good.
It's not economic activity. Did that just get overhauled with Obamacare? And I know we haven't learned it exactly yet.
Well, keep in mind, Lopez discussed whether something was economic. It did discuss what was inactivity. Right? The novel aspect of the Obamacare case is focusing and not just on whether something was economic, but whether it was a class of activities that could be regulated. Right? That was what was novel. Okay, Louis, I think I saw your hand up, or was it Lois? I'm sorry, it dropped.
I'm all right. Thank you.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to our questions. I think question number 5, is a decision to not purchase health insurance interstate economic activity? The Obamacare case held the answer is B, no. The answer is it's not. Because it's not activity at all. It's inactivity. The majority vigorously disagreed. I mean, this was a very divisive case, which I'll talk about in a few moments. And then the question number 6 about the mandate to wear a mask. If you ask my honest opinion as a student of constitutional law, I think the answer here is no. I think Laney's probably correct that the decision not to wear a mask is not economic in nature. I don't think it's a activity at all under the Obamacare case, but either under Lopez or NFIB, I think it gets the same result. Congress cannot aggregate local decisions to keep your face open. I don't think they can do that. But, I just want you to understand when the Supreme Court wrote the Obamacare decision in 2012, nearly, 8 years ago, they were not thinking about mask mandates. When the Supreme Court wrote Gonzales v. Rage in 2003, they were not thinking about an Affordable Care Act mandate to buy insurance. When the court wrote Lopez and Morrison in the 90s, they were not thinking about medicinal marijuana. Right? When the court wrote Wickard v. Filburn in 1939, whatever year it was, the court was not thinking about guns in school zones. Right? When you write a decision and you're a Supreme Court justice, you might think you're, God, but you're really not. You can't anticipate what's going to happen later. And the decisions that you render have unintended consequences, right? They apply in circumstances that you don't quite anticipate, that you can't predict. And what happens is lawyers try to find little crevices in the opinions to pick out ways, say, aha, this is not what it's going to be. It's going to be different. Right? Think about it, right? Darby and Wickard didn't really care about whether an activity was economic. They concerned economic activities, to be sure. Those cases didn't really discuss this line. But Lopez said, aha, we're going to draw a line. Right? We're going to draw a line. We're going to say economic is on one side and non-economic is on the other side. Okay, great. But then you get to Raich. And Justice Stevens says, I'm going to draw a different line. I'm going to get this big Webster's dictionary and I'm going to define economic with this broad definition. Right? But guess what? Even with a broad definition of economic, you still have whether it's activity. And Obamacare says you can't regulate an activity. So you have Obamacare saying you can't regulate the decision not to buy insurance, and that leads to a mask mandate saying, well, the decision not to wear a mask is an activity, and Congress can't stop this pandemic, this national plague spreading the country. But they can tax you for it, right? They can impose a tax on those who don't wear a mask. So just make sure you pay the tax. Isn't ConLaw fun? Right? Decisions from 70 or 80 years ago are being poked and prodded to see what the power is of the federal government to require people to wear masks during this pandemic. Go ahead, Lainey.
So it seems like the founding fathers tried to be very careful to think about the consequences in the future, even though they didn't really know what the future holds. But when the Supreme Court now is looking at a case, do they only consider that case, or are they forward thinking, and do they have boundaries on that?
Good question. I think there's a couple ways of answering your question. I'll do my best because it's not an easy question. It's not always clear, what the framers thought. These were different people with different perspectives who had very different understandings. Did they create a constitution that was flexible? Did they create one that was meant to be strictly adhered to? I can teach you an entire class on that single question. So I'll focus on the second part of your question, which is a little bit easier. I bet the justices try as hard as they can to think about the consequences of their decisions, but they can't. The human mind, you ever see a horse? Horses have what are called blinders, right? These things they put on their left and the right so they don't get distracted. They look, straight forward where they're going. And I think all of us have blinders, and I don't mean that as an insult. We only can see what we know. And you don't know what you don't know. A song with those lyrics. You only know what you know. And I think the justices have to have a healthy dose of humility to know that what they don't know. And they have to recognize that their decisions will have consequences beyond their knowledge. And efforts to try to predict these things, I think, are unavailing, right? I mean, in 2012, Who would have thought that this decision would tell Congress they can't make people wear masks in a pandemic? I mean, it wasn't anyone's even brainwaves to think about that. But here we are. Right? If Congress had tried to enact a mask mandate for Lopez, I think the court could have just said that the decision not to wear a mask is interstate activity. And in the aggregate, that interstate activity has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. But by injecting that word economic, you've just inverted that. Moses writes in the chat, the dissent does. That's a really good point. One of the reasons why dissents are important is it shows that at a given point in time that someone, at least some judge, saw some of the pitfalls, some of the risks of the majority opinion. And I think it was Justice Ginsburg or maybe Scalia, or maybe they both said this, that the reason why they write dissents is to talk to the future. It's not to talk to the present. It's to talk to future generations who will see perhaps their wisdom. And very often dissent becomes majority opinion. People say, oh, Josh, do I have to read dissents? Oh, yeah, you do. In this class, you do. You absolutely have to read dissents. Because very often the reasoning in dissent may prove more persuasive. Scalia's concurrence in race, for example, I think proved very influential in the Obamacare decision. And I think put Scalia in a bit of a tough spot when he got to NFIB. Okay. By the way, I usually teach this class differently. I usually give like a 2-hour lecture on the history of the Obamacare case. I decided not to do that today because it's boring on Zoom. I can't do 2 hours of lecturing on Zoom. I'll kill myself. It's too much. But if you want to watch it last year, I think it's enjoyable. It's a good. I've given the talk 100 times. It's good. But I'm not doing it this year. Okay. Questions before we actually get to the case. We haven't even gotten to it yet. Someone? Oh no, Elaine, you're off mute. Okay, that's why I heard a feedback. All right. Let me give you some background about the Obamacare decision. The story's a little bit personal, but it's worthwhile. I graduated law school in 2009. Oh boy, about 10 years ago. And when I first graduated, I started a legal blog, which is not very important for now. But I began writing on this new law that was being debated in Congress, which was called the Affordable Care Act. It became known as Obamacare. And one of the provisions of this law became known as the individual mandate. Okay? Now, this was not a novel idea. It had been experimented in several states. And the thinking goes like this. If you're an insurance company, your job is to make money. That's just any company, that's their job, is to make money. Insuring healthy people is a good bet. Healthy people generally don't use a lot of services. I mean, most young people, looking at all of you, probably don't go to the doctor very often. Thankfully, hopefully you don't. So for an insurance company, young and healthy people are good bets. Older and sicker people, though, are not such good bets because they're going to require more services. So insurance companies responded to these forces. They would charge more money for older and sicker people, and they would charge reduced premiums to younger and healthier people. And in some cases, let's say a person had a very serious pre-existing condition, they would just deny coverage altogether. And this became a problem on the individual marketplace. Now, if you work for a company, right, you work for GE or Chevron or whatever, this doesn't really matter because group policies are based on the group. They're not based on individuals. So if you're working for GE and you have a pre-existing condition, you're going to get covered. But this was a problem for those in the individual market who bought their own insurance policies. So some states began imposing laws as, okay, you cannot charge people extra because of their age or their sickness. And you cannot charge people extra if they have a pre-existing condition. You have to charge people in a standard fashion. A 30-year-old male is charged the same rate no matter what his or her health conditions are. Okay, but this These sorts of consumer protections created a problem. What was the problem? Well, why am I going to buy insurance and pay a premium every month if I can just wait till I get sick and buy insurance then? May sound risky, but people did it. And this created problems in states like Massachusetts and New Jersey and elsewhere, where people would simply wait till they got sick to buy insurance, and at that point, the insurance companies could not price them out of the market. They were required to give them the full policy at the standard price. This creates a problem, because now healthy people are not paying for insurance, and sick people are. So then another policy was adopted, what became known as the individual mandate. The individual mandate. It was actually pioneered in Massachusetts. Then Mitt Romney, a Republican, was the governor. And the mandate says that you are required to purchase insurance. And the failure to purchase insurance results in the payment of a penalty. Now, someone asks, how can the state do this? Well, the states have the police power. The states can make you wear a mask. And I think the state can make you buy insurance. Indeed, most of you have car insurance, right? The state requires you to maintain car insurance when you're a driver in Texas. The state requires you to wear seatbelts. Some states require you to wear helmets, right? States can impose mandates. And the failure to wear a seatbelt or wear a helmet can result in a ticket, a fine. So there's not much of an argument that the states lack this power. I can maybe make an argument due process, but it's not very important right now. Fast forward to 2009. Congress was considering a similar model. Congress would have required health insurance companies to protect people with pre-existing conditions and not deny coverage. But in order to prevent people from free riding, Congress decided to impose a provision that became known as the individual mandate. Now, I'm being a little bit cagey, became known as. The statute doesn't actually call it individual mandate. That's not in the statute. It's called the individual responsibility provision, whatever the hell that means, right? The idea was you take responsibility for your own actions, right? You maintain insurance because it's the right thing to do. Now what happened if you didn't maintain insurance? You had to pay money to the feds. You had to pay money to the feds. See, I'm not characterizing it as a tax or penalty. We'll get there later. You had to pay money to the feds. This was an amount that was set by statute. It was based on your income, and you would include it on your tax return. If you didn't pay it, the IRS could use the standard tools to, for example, take it out of your tax refund, or different things they could do. Okay. Was this statute constitutional? So I have to admit, in 2009, I just graduated law school. I was sitting roughly where you were all sitting, and I was skeptical. I wrote on my blog and elsewhere that this case seems kind of kooky. And I was like, well, health insurance is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people don't buy health insurance. It'll have effects on hospitals, and hospitals are interstate, connected. And of course, this is whatever commerce. I was wrong. I was doing exactly what I'm telling you not to do, which is why I'm so hard on you. I didn't do the analytical legwork. Under Lopez, Raich, and Morrison, I just didn't do the hard work. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is the activity Congress is regulating? Right? Douglas, you here?
Yes, sir.
All right, Douglas, so let's be very precise here. There's a law that says you shall maintain insurance. What is the activity? Or let me ask the question a little bit differently. What is Congress regulating? Just be precise here.
Regulating every individual having insurance or access to it.
Well, let's just be a little more precise. You say every individual. Every means a lot of people, individual means one. So are you talking about groups or one person at a time? Just be precise here.
All people, everyone.
So if you don't have insurance, do I have to pay a tax?
No.
Okay, try it again.
Yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, you will have to pay a tax.
No. If Douglas doesn't have insurance, does Josh pay a tax?
No.
So who's being regulated here?
The people who...
Say person. Say person.
The person who does not have insurance.
Okay, very good. That's it. That's the right answer. Okay, we have to let's just get there. But I'll be precise. It's not regulating America as a class, right? It's an individual responsibility provision. If Douglas doesn't buy insurance, Douglas has paid money to the feds. Does that make sense, Doug?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. So the first step, and this is where back in 2009, I didn't see it. And I, in hindsight, I feel like an idiot because I'm here lecturing you on all this, but, we live and learn. So the question is, the thing being regulated are people who are uninsured, right? The thing being regulated is people who are uninsured. Now, Rachel, you here?
Yes.
So, Rachel, let me ask you a question, please. Is the decision to go uninsured economic in nature?
No,
Why do you say no?
it's not economic because it's not involving any sort of economic or monetary activity. It's refraining from engaging in an economic activity.
Well, I think you're probably right, but couldn't you characterize the decision to go uninsured as self-insuring?
You could.
I mean, for example, we say instead of paying Aetna or Cigna $100 a month, I'll put that money in a savings account, and that way, if I ever get sick, I can use it. A health savings account, right? Isn't the decision to go uninsured economic in that regard?
Yes.
So what's the answer? Is it economic or not? Ooh.
I mean, I know what the Supreme Court said.
You think it can go either way? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, I think that what they said is that not purchasing insurance it's not regulating economic activity.
Don't get to activity yet. Just, is it economic?
Yes, it has an economic effect.
Ooh, no. When you say effect, though, what does effect mean? What lets you say it affects? What test is that you're thinking of?
Not the test that should be applied, which is substantial effects test.
What do you need to get to substantial effects? What are the three things you need?
You need there to be intrastate
Good.
economic activity.
You need all three. So far we have two, right? There's intrastate and you have economic.
Mm-hmm.
But is it activity?
No.
Aha. Very good, Rachel. Okay, everyone just see what we just did right there, right? I think she that clarified it, I think, quite well. The error I made in 2009 was I only considered intrastate and economic. I didn't quite grasp the significance of the word activity because none of the cases had ever made that an issue, right? Of course, it's an activity, right? You're possessing a gun, you're engaging in domestic abuse, you're growing marijuana. Of course, there's activity. But what if there's no activity? What if the thing being regulated is outside the classes of activity? I didn't see it. Like, I didn't even know that was an issue. Whether it's right or wrong, we can argue, and I think the dissent can make a good point that this distinction is frivolous. But it was right there in the cases. I didn't see it until others pointed it out. So I'll tell you an anecdote that I tell every year. So in November 2009, again, I had just finished law school a few months before. I think I just got my bar results like a few weeks earlier. By the way, the bar is now. Send positive vibes to your friends who are sitting for the in-person bar. The Hilton Americas, 2 blocks from the law school we can't go to. Anyway, I was at a convention. It was for the Federal Society. The Federal Society is a right-of-center, conservative libertarian group. And I was sort of just walking around, chatting with people. And there were people that were thinking about this new law. And they're saying, this can't be constitutional, right? Congress can't regulate inactivity. And I'm like, this is nonsense. There's no cases to support this, right? And then my colleague Randy Barnett, who had argued Rach, comes in, and people are talking to him saying, "Hey, Randy, you want to write something about this Obamacare mandate?" And he's like, "Well, I've never given it much thought. It's kind of a new thing for me." And then they sort of got together later. This event happened at the Mayflower Hotel in D.C., and I've called it the Mayflower Compact because it proves a very important moment where the intellectual argument against the ACA was basically germinated in a very short time that I just happened to be walking by. But then Randy and others developed the argument that the cases, Raich, Lopez, and Morrison, all involve economic activity. But what the ACA mandate was regulating was not economic activity, but rather was regulating inactivity, something outside the class of activity. And this was not supported by past precedent. And this was the argument. Now, it isn't clear this distinction matters, right? Of course, all these cases use the word activity. Wickard, Lopez, Morrison, Raich, of course they use the word activity. But those were not essential elements of the opinion, right? It's sort of just a word that was used. In the same way, of course, Darby and Wickard used the word economic, but it didn't really matter. So you see what's going on here. You're looking at old opinions, and you're finding words in those opinions to latch onto, and you're sort of reconstructing those cases along lines that were not really at issue. I see nothing wrong with this. This is what good lawyering is. It's looking at old precedents and finding things to support your argument. If you are all fortunate enough to pass the bar one day, which I think you all will, you'll be doing this. You're looking at old precedents and say, aha, see what the judge wrote there? That's what we need. And it's the ability to have the entire body of case law in your mind that you can pick and pull and twist and spin around these arguments. That's what makes good lawyering. Indeed, the argument that Randy relied on, he didn't make up. It came from a recent law school graduate who wrote a note in his law review about Raich, where he said, well, Congress can regulate these classes of activities, but they can't mandate activity. And it was a student note, who cared? But it became relevant with the Obamacare case. Does that make sense to everyone? Right? The key move was to classify the decision to go uninsured as outside the scope of economic activity. Without question, failing to buy insurance has economic effects. That's what Rachel said a minute ago, right? She's 100% correct, right? If I don't buy insurance and I go to a hospital and they have to treat me by law, the cost will be shifted to the federal government or the states or whoever else runs a hospital. Right? Without question, going uninsured has substantial effects on interstate commerce. But you only get to the substantial effects test if you touch all the bases. Intrastate, economic, activity. And that is the key focus in the Obamacare case. The court holds that going uninsured is not economic activity. It's not activity at all. Right? The power to regulate interstate commerce does not include the power to shove someone into the stream of commerce. Was Asahi? Where's that from? ConLaw did it first. CIFRO got it second, right? The notion of stream of commerce is the flow of interstate commerce. Right? Congress can't shove you. They can't force you to engage in activity. Because once you're active, they regulate you. But they can't force you to engage in activity. Right? That's why I don't think a mask mandate works. Of course, wearing a mask, or actually not wearing maybe wearing a mask around your nose like people do all the time, right? Wearing a mask around your nose will have an effect on interstate commerce because you're spreading contagions. But Congress can't make you wear the mask in the first place. James writes, they shoved Wickard into the stream of commerce. Yeah, good analogy, right? Well, actually, no. You know what? I think it's not exactly right. Because with Wickard, he was growing wheat, right, which was economic activity. And once you engage in local economic activity, you are basically in that stream of commerce. But just sitting at home on your butt doing nothing, not buying insurance, you're not in that stream. You're not engaging in economic activity. So questions on that move. The dissent vigorously disagreed in the Obamacare case. Vigorously disagreed. The dissent argued that going uninsured was an activity because you were self-insuring, right? When you say, I don't want to buy insurance, what you're basically saying is, I don't want to pay for health care now. The dissent says everyone will need health insurance, right, at some point, right? Everyone gets sick. We're all mortal. We all die. We're all going to need health care at some point. To this, the majority responds, well, we might all need health care. We don't all need health insurance. Ooh, the difference between health care and health insurance, right? We all need health care. We're all going to die at some point. But we might not all want to pay for insurance in advance. To this day, law professors are angry at Randy. To this day, they're angry. They we're not very popular, in case you couldn't tell. You might like us, but we're not very popular. Because they think Randy's argument was frivolous, that it was wrong, that he hoodwinked the Supreme Court, that he created this distinction out of thin air, that it was not actually present in the cases. I agree. But I like you guys to know both sides of the story. So I'm okay with it, but most people aren't. Okay, so do you all understand the distinction between the activity and an activity line? Okay. Now, I think the most important aspect of the Obamacare decision wasn't this activity versus inactivity line. The most important element, I think Bianca mentioned a few moments ago, was about the necessary and proper clause analysis. We often think of this phrase necessary and proper as like a single thing. It's like, necessary and proper, good and plenty, right? It's a single thing that you have. That law is necessary and proper. But the most significant move the chief made was to separate necessary and proper. Okay. Oh, I see Tyler's here. You here, sir?
Yeah, good morning, Professor.
Yeah, you want to just say hi for a minute? This is your Langdell, who I mentioned earlier. He'll be your Langdell for this semester. Want to say hi?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I apologize for being a little late. I had a job interview with a justice going a little bit over, so wanted to get here and just say hello. I look forward to seeing everybody on Friday that's able to make it. I think we're going to have a good time.
Okay, very good. And would you mind just putting your email in the chat, please, John, so we can email you if you have any questions?
Absolutely, I'll do that, and I'll put a copy of the invitation and everything that's on there. So I think Tony, the guy that coordinates the Langdell, he'll have the meeting ID and stuff. But the password for Section C is Blackman. So some of them are random letter numbers and stuff like that. I just made one that was pretty easy to use. So I'll put that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to give me a call. But I'll put the meeting ID and in my personal email in the chat. Okay, great. And by the way, everyone, Tyler was one of my top students. He knows what he's talking about. Tyler, we're doing the Obamacare case now, so you can see why I'm so agitated. Oh, yeah, I understand, sir. Absolutely. Okay. Very good. Thank you. All right. So I think next up is it Shaheen? How do you pronounce it? I'm sorry for pronouncing it wrong. How's it?
Shawnee.
Oh, Shawnee. I'll try to remember that. I'm sorry. So, Shawnee, how does Chief Justice Roberts understand the necessary and proper clause here, right? We know that the decision to not buy insurance is not interstate commerce, but how does he understand the necessary and proper clause here?
He separates the two, so he holds that although it is necessary, it's not actually proper.
Okay, very good. Go on. I'm not done, but go ahead.
Because it's not proper because you're forcing people to buy insurance. And that's more than what the necessary and proper clause gives Congress power to do.
Okay, so Shawnee, so what case did we study which helps us understand the phrase necessary? What's that case?
Oh, we just talked about this.
Yeah, someone read it earlier.
Rage?
Now go earlier. I asked you to do modern. Now, there's an older case. What's the seminal, like the foundational case that tells us what necessary means?
Oh my god, we just did that's what I literally looking at. No, it's not.
What was it about? What were the facts of the case, if you don't remember the name?
Give me a second, hold on. The Wickard one.
Even further back.
Okay, before that.
What case tells us the meaning of the word necessary? Someone mentioned a few minutes ago.
McCulloch.
That's it. McCulloch. And how did McCulloch define necessary, Shawnee?
They said, let's see here. Needful, requisite, useful,
That's it.
conducive, and convenient.
I'm glad those are in your notes at your convenience. That's very good that you have that. Thank you, Shawnee. All right. So the phrase necessary was defined very early in the 1820s, 1824, by McCulloch v. Maryland. Right. That was a very early decision in McCulloch. Virtually every case after McCulloch only focused on the word necessary. Is it useful? Is it needful? Right? Which is a very permissive standard. But in the 1990s, the court began to focus on the word proper. There was a couple cases we haven't read yet, but we'll read them maybe next week, I think, where the court began to suggest that a law might be necessary, but not proper. And Scalia makes his point, I think, pretty well in Raich. He says that the regulation of local marijuana is both necessary and proper to have the Controlled Substances Act, to have this national regulatory scheme. So in Raich, Scalia uses both of those elements. What Roberts does in NFIB, though, is significant. He splits it in half and says that this is necessary, right? Having a mandate to buy insurance is a useful way to prevent cost overages, right? It's a useful way to have a healthcare system. So having the mandate is necessary, but it's not proper. And it's not proper for the reasons Shawnee mentioned. It goes beyond Congress's powers to intrude on the individual, to force the individual to buy insurance. That was an unprecedented exercise of federal power. That's the title of my first book, Unprecedented, right? It was an unprecedented exercise of federal power. Congress had never before required people to buy insurance. Never done it before. And this was not proper. Oh, hold on. John, Tyler is giving me a book blurb. Okay, thank you, sir. I signed that one, right? Did I sign that for you? Okay, good. Thank you.
That one, I get the trifecta. I've got that one, Unraveled, and 100 ConLaw cases that one from
just keep writing more books for you. Okay, thank you, sir. All right. The argument was this was an unprecedented mandate and was not a proper exercise of federal power. Okay? This was significant because now you have the court saying you have to look at both whether the law is necessary and proper. So let me try to summarize because there's so many moving parts in this analysis. Right? So first, we ask, the decision to not buy insurance, is that economic activity? Well, it might be economic, but it's not activity because it's a decision not to do something. Therefore, you do not get to the substantial effects test. Right? You can't rely on the substantial effects test. So we go back to McCulloch. Right? Is this law necessary and proper under McCulloch? We don't use Wickard. We don't use Darby. We go all the way back to McCulloch v. Maryland, 1824. And under McCulloch, Roberts says that this law might be necessary, it's convenient, it's useful, but it's not proper. He doesn't really tell us what proper means, which someone's, Josh, what's proper? I don't know. And the court hasn't clarified that either, but it means something. There's some meaning there. Therefore, this law is not valid under the commerce power, and this law is not valid under the necessary and proper clause. I'll get to the taxing power in a moment. I wish I could end class here and say this was done, but that's not the end of the case. The case goes on. To this day, every time I read the case, I'm like, oh, we're going to win. Oh, no. It sort of just goes the other way. I think it's some sort of PTSD from John Roberts. He's just given to me over the years. Just this reaction to him. Okay. Questions on the necessary and proper and commerce angle? All right. Well, then we get on as Tyler knows, the John Roberts roller coaster. He always does this every year, where he sort of zigs and zags at the last minute. So the chief explains that the law cannot be upheld under the commerce and necessary and proper powers, but there's always a but. But the court has a duty to read a statute in such a way that it is upheld. And the chief found his answer in the taxing power. Now, the taxing power doesn't fit really anywhere in our cases. We don't really study it except for this case, so I don't want you to dwell too much on it. But the taxing power, is broader than the commerce power. The taxing power is broader than the commerce power. So, for example, Congress can't ban the sale of oil in Detroit, but Congress can tax the sale of oil in Detroit. That was DeWitt. There was another case on alcohol. Congress can't ban the sale of alcohol, but Congress can tax the sale of alcohol. The taxing power always regulates local activity. You can also tax inactivity. The failure to do something means you can pay a tax. If you don't take out if you don't, file some paperwork, you can be assessed a tax. So the chief says, can the Affordable Care Act be construed as a tax? So first off, Robert says it's not actually a tax. Congress refers to the payment as a penalty, and Congress didn't call it a tax. It's not a tax. But the ACA can be construed as imposing a tax in order to save it. Why? The ACA raises revenue. You include the money in your tax return. The IRS collects it. If it looks like a tax, if it quacks like a tax, it's a tax, right? It's close enough to a tax. Therefore, the chief says we apply a saving construction. What the heck is a saving construction? It's basically a rewriting of the statute, right? That the statute says one thing, the statute as written is not valid, but we will read it in a different way so as to uphold it. And on these grounds, the court upheld the validity of the Affordable Care Act. Roberts was joined by the four progressive justices, Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. It didn't really matter what he wrote. Frankly, they just needed 5 votes. And they just said, sure, whatever, Roberts, fine. That's the 5 votes. You should know as informed citizens how Roberts's saving construction operated, but for your doctrine, right, for your ConLaw exam, what you really need to know is the commerce and necessary and proper framework. I'll get to the Medicaid in a minute. I haven't even mentioned it yet. Does everyone get how the Roberts commerce and necessary and proper plus framework interacts? Everyone get at least that much? Right? You have to first ask, is this interstate commerce? No. Is this economic activity? No. Therefore, you don't get to substantial effects, and you're stuck with McCulloch. And it failed the McCulloch test. All right, you can walk through it one step at a time. But you need to walk through each of those steps to get this one right. And the Roberts opinion, I know I hate on him so much, but he's a really good writer. He's very clear when he wants to be. When he wants to be vague, he can be so vague and it drives me bonkers. But when he wants to be clear, he's the clearest writer in the court. He doesn't have a close second at this point. The Roberts opinion is a very good summary of the doctrine. And if you want to get a good overview of how the cases have evolved, study the Roberts opinion. He drives me insane, but he's a good writer. And he's very good for teaching opinions. We'll have a couple of Roberts cases this year. When you read his opinion, you know exactly what he wants to do, unless he doesn't want you to. Then He just sort of throws words on the page and very carefully. But my favorite writers in the court now are Roberts and Kagan for different reasons. Kagan's a very good writer, very entertaining, very engaging. Roberts is like surgical precision. It's like, like you're getting a heart transplant. You want Roberts doing it. It'll be perfect. The other justices are whatever, but those two are very good. Scalia was the best. I still miss his Scalia opinions. You'll get plenty of Scalia opinions later in the year, but he was the best. Okay. Questions again on the Medicaid, on the commerce and necessary and proper? In my remaining lovely 15 minutes of my shortened class, I hate this, we talk about the Medicaid expansion. All right, so let's go back to South Dakota v. Dole. Right, South Dakota v. Dole. This was a case involving the spending power. You notice I didn't say the spending clause because there is no such thing as a spending clause, right? That's not a thing, right? There is no provision in the Constitution that lets Congress spend money. But we know that Congress can spend money on the states. Congress can give money to the states. And this is not a free lunch. There's no such thing as a free lunch. When the feds wanted South Dakota to raise the drinking age, they said, aha, South Dakota, here are these nice highway funds. You like these highway funds? Oh, they're very nice. You want them? Raise your drinking age to 21. We'll give you some money. And if you don't, we'll just take that money away. The court said that was valid. Right? And the court in Dole had a couple factors, right? Was the condition clearly stated? Did it relate to the federal interest, right? But the most important factor was actually the fifth factor identified in Dole. Was the amount of money offered coercive? In other words, was the risk so great that you couldn't say no? And the example that was used during the litigation was there was an old comedy skit where a robber walks up to you, puts a gun to your head and says, your money or your life? Which one are you going to choose, right? Will anyone actually, you know what? I'll keep my money. You can kill me. Maybe, I don't know, right? But the idea is if the risk is so great, you don't really have a choice. You might think of the concept of duress from contract. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's in the ballpark. That if you make someone an offer for a contract where they can't say no, like The Godfather, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse, right? If you make someone an offer they can't refuse, there's really no choice. And what Dole says, if there's no meaningful choice, then the spending provision is invalid. Now, Dole upheld the highway fund money because there's only a fairly small amount of funding to be lost. In contrast, the Affordable Care Act threatened the states significantly. And it relied on what's known as the Medicaid expansion. There are two federal health programs. There's Medicare and Medicaid, and people get confused all the time. Medicare is for senior citizens. Medicare is for senior citizens. Medicaid is for people who have low income or who have certain health conditions. How do I remember that? Medicare with an R is for people who are retired. That's how I remember it. Medicaid is for people who have low incomes or certain health conditions. Now, Medicaid is funded by the federal government, but the states administer it. Basically, the feds give the states money to run the program in a certain way. Before Obamacare, you could sign up for Medicaid if you were at the poverty line, which varies from year to year. Obamacare said we're going to expand Medicaid. That if you're now at 130% of the poverty line, you get to rely on this insurance. In other words, the states were required to add more people to the Medicaid rolls. Now, what happened if a state declined to expand Medicaid? Well, here comes the condition. Right? Here comes a condition. Oh, Bridget, that's good. I like that. Medicaid is for people that need aid. Medicare is for the elderly. That's good. Here's the condition that they said is that if you don't expand Medicaid, you will lose all of your funding. Not just the new funding under the ACA, lose all of your funding. This proves to be a very important point. What the court said by a vote of 7-2, so this vote was 7-2, the Roberts, Kagan, Breyer were in the majority as well, is that this was coercive. The financial inducement was so coercive that it passed the point at which pressure turns into compulsion. Right? This was a test from the Dole case. When pressure turns into compulsion, that states could not decline. That if a state declined to expand Medicaid, they would lose billions of dollars, and no state could reasonably do that. Therefore, the spending condition was invalid. This was the first spending condition the Supreme Court found violated this fifth factor. First time ever. It was a stunning decision. All the lower courts had upheld the spending provision, all of them, except for the Supreme Court. There's some backstory why that Roberts made a deal with Kagan where they said that the mandate was okay, but the expansion wasn't. These people are not nearly as savvy as they think they are. But we have to deal with. So you have in the majority, Roberts, Kagan, and Breyer says that the expansion is invalid. And you have in the plurality as well, you have Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito. Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, Alito argue again that the expansion is invalid, but they disagree on the remedy. Scalia, Kennedy, Thomas, and Alito would have declared the entire ACA unconstitutional, the entire statute null and void, declared the entire law invalid. Roberts, as we know, used a saving construction to uphold the mandate, and then he used yet another one. I feel like these are colored. Another one, right? Another saving construction to save the Medicaid expansion. He says states can opt in. If a state chooses to expand Medicaid, they can do so, and then they can accept the funds. But if a state doesn't want the money, they don't have to accept it, and they can stay with the old Medicaid. As a result, we now have a two-tier system in this country where some states have expanded and some states haven't. This has been cataclysmic. It's been such a disaster. If you live in Texarkana, Texas, if you live in Texarkana, Texas, there's no Medicaid expansion. If you move across the street to Texarkana, Arkansas, you have it. So depending where you live with the exact same income, you may or may not be subject to the Medicaid program. And this is a direct result of the Chief's construction, right? Under the original design, states had no choice. They had to. The idea was we need the entire country to be under the same system to help people out. But now states, Texas and others, have said, screw that, we don't want it. It's largely become a political issue now. It may change, but I don't know when. But states that oppose Obamacare are still challenging it. And there's a court case this year I'll maybe mention in a minute. But the core point is that the Medicaid expansion proved to be coercive, and as a result was unconstitutional. Okay, questions on the spending clause analysis. Still not over this case. You can tell I'm a little more animated than usual. Sorry. Questions on the Medicaid expansion? All right. Let me try to synthesize a bit before we head out. We are now wrapping up our topic on enumerated powers. And if you want to go back to page 22, please, in your book, I think we can do this entire chart now. I think we can. I'll do the dreaded screen share so you can see the entire thing. Okay. Oops. Okay, so we have this chart at page 22, which we keep coming back to, and I think it's a good way to synthesize the entire, really our entire semester so far. Okay. So our entire discussion has been on this doctrine of implied powers. And when I say implied powers, we're talking about the necessary and proper clause. I guess a little bit bigger so you can see it. And we have cases decided over the course of 200 years. And really, the seminal case about implied powers is McCulloch. When in doubt, always go back to McCulloch. But you should always be aware there are more recent cases that might apply. We have the case from the Chase Court, right? DeWitt held that Congress can't regulate the local sale of oil. Hepburn held that Congress cannot regulate and mandate the use of legal tender. But then a year later, in Knox v. Lee, they adopted a very broad conception of federal power. And if you notice, the Knox v. Lee expansion, in our view, is the broadest statement of federal power ever, even broader than Wickard. Then you get to the progressive era. E.C. Knight held that Congress can't regulate manufacturing. This began the so-called direct effects test. Champion v. Ames involved interstate lottery ticket movement. That said that's something that Congress could prohibit. Hammer versus Dagenhart extended the direct effect test, which said that Congress can't indirectly regulate labor conditions. And Schechter v. Poultry also applied the direct effect test, which is that Congress can't use its necessary and proper powers to prohibit the sale of butchering of chickens in Brooklyn. And then we get to the New Deal and the three big cases, each expanding federal power. NLRB versus Jones and Laughlin Steel still use a direct effect test, but sort of suggested that we need to be more deferential. Darby officially overruled Hammer and got rid of the direct effect test. And then Wickard brought in the aggregation doctrine, the aggregation principle, with substantial effects. So now you have local activity that might not be interstate, it's local intrastate activity, but if the activity has a substantial effect on interstate commerce, Congress can regulate that local activity. Now, what we didn't know yet is that Wickard and Darby had a limitation. It only involved economic activity. The word economic was there, to be sure, but that was a limit only identified by Lopez 50 years after. We move on to the Warren Court with Heart of Atlanta Motel and Katzenbach. In Heart of Atlanta Motel, people were the commerce, right? The Soylent Green, it's people, right? The people are the ones moving from state to state. And in Katzenbach, you have what's called the jurisdictional hook analysis, where if you're engaging in economic activity and there's some sort of hook to interstate commerce, Congress can regulate it. You don't even need substantial effects there. You have this hook approach. Then we get to the Rehnquist Court, where things start getting dialed back. Now, if you notice, Lopez doesn't move more to the left, right? Lopez doesn't reverse the New Deal. It doesn't go back to the 1920s. Lopez sort of draws a line in the sand, where Randy says this far and no farther. They don't go any further beyond the New Deal court. Lopez says the possession of a gun is not economic activity, therefore we don't get the substantial effects test. Morrison said domestic violence is not economic activity, therefore we don't get the substantial effects. But in Raich, the court says that cultivating marijuana is economic activity, and therefore we get the substantial effects. Fast forward to 2012 with the Obamacare decision. The decision to forego insurance might be economic, but it's not activity. Therefore, we do not go to substantial effects. We do not look at whether this local activity has a substantial effect on interstate commerce. Instead, we go all the way back up to McCulloch v. Maryland, and look how narrow things are over here. We're back to the 1820s, 1819. We're back to 1819. And Robert says, is this a necessary law to prevent healthcare costs from rising across state lines? Yes. But is it proper? No. This entire chart's like a big loop, right? At the end of Obamacare, we basically said the New Deal cases simply don't apply. We go back to John Marshall and McCulloch. Done. Okay. Questions? Okay. I have a faculty meeting starting at 12:30, so I can't do office hours right away. Come back around 1 or so. I'll be available. I hope at one I'm done. I put the minute poll on, so please enter your answers, and I look forward to seeing you all later today. If you need another time, just email me. Okay. Thank you so much.